In this video, I want to talk about a medieval artefact of great artistic beauty that is very infrequently seen. It is the Crown of St Wenceslas, the crown of the Bohemian lands, a medieval territory that is more or less coterminous with the modern-day Czech Republic. Since 1929, this crown has only been put on public display 15 times. The last time was last year, in 2024. For the past century and a half, the crown has been kept hidden from view in the crown chamber of the chapel of St Wenceslas in St Vitus's Cathedral in Prague. The door of this chamber, which is the strong room, is in the corner of the chapel, directly behind the shrine of St Wenceslas, who gives the crown its name. More on why a little later. An agreement made in 1948 manages the crown's tight security. The chamber can only be opened with the use of 7 keys. These are distributed among different Czech officials. 5 are given to politicians: the President of the Czech Republic, the Prime Minister, the Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies, the President of the Senate, and the Mayor of Prague. And 2 are churchmen: the Catholic Archbishop of Prague and the Dean of the Chapter of the Cathedral, in whose care the crown rests. Such security measures are a reflection of the potent symbolism of the Crown of St Wenceslas and the wider regalia as a representation of Czech national sovereignty, identity and historical continuity. When the crown is displayed, it is placed in Prague Castle, which was the traditional residence of the Bohemian monarchs, where usually a replica of it is on show. I'll talk a little more about the crown as an object in a moment, but first I must address the fascinating background to the creation of this Gothic masterpiece. The crown was made at a time in the 14th century when Bohemia was the centre of Europe's political life, and Prague was a place of great culture and artistic creativity. Bohemia was at that time ruled by one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe, the House of Luxembourg. Until 1306, the Bohemian lands had been ruled for nearly 500 years by a single dynasty, the Promyslid dynasty. The most well-known member of that dynasty was a man whose significance we will come to consider more broadly in just a moment. He was St Wenceslas, an individual that those who know your English Christmas carols will have encountered before as Good King Wenceslas. Wenceslas was not actually a king at all, for when he lived in the 10th century, the Bohemian lands were constituted as an independent duchy that was centred on Prague. In the year 1002, that duchy then became a constituent part of the expanding Holy Roman Empire, with the Duke of Bohemia becoming a vassal of the Holy Roman Emperor, and also, significantly, a powerful Prince-Elector, one of the rulers who elected the Holy Roman Emperor. It was due to the power that the role as elector brought that the duchy would, in time, be transformed into a kingdom. A number of Bohemian dukes had been elevated by the Holy Roman Emperors to kingly status, but until the late 12th century, that status was bestowed only for life and was not hereditary. Bohemia only formally became a kingdom within the empire in 1198, and its transformation was primarily due to the effects of civil war in Germany. In 1198 there was a rivalry for the Holy Roman Imperial Crown between the House of Welf, represented by Otto IV, and the House of Hohenstaufen, represented by Philip of Swabia. Both men had been elected King of the Romans, the first step to becoming Emperor. The then Duke of Bohemia, Ottokar, was a bit of a smooth political operator and was able to convince both contenders for the imperial crown that he was on their side, and to request in exchange for his support that he be acknowledged as King of Bohemia. Duke Ottokar was therefore crowned as king in 1198. For the next 10 years, King Ottokar backed Otto IV in the rivalry for the Holy Roman Imperial throne. However, in 1208, Philip of Swabia, Otto's great rival, was assassinated, and Otto then became emperor. At this point, Ottokar, with some of the other electors, changed sides, and in 1211 they convened a diet and elected the 17-year-old King of Sicily, Frederick, a member of another branch of the Hohenstaufen dynasty, as emperor too. When in October of 1212 Frederick went to Germany to be crowned as King of the Romans, Ottokar took the opportunity to demand a confirmation of his kingly status, and Philip signed a document known as the Golden Bull of Sicily, which confirmed the permanent status of Bohemia as a kingdom, with the King of Bohemia as the senior elector in the Holy Roman Empire. Moving forward to the early years of the 14th century, and in 1305 King Wenceslas II of Bohemia died, and the throne then passed to his 15-year-old son Wenceslas III. Like many a teenage monarch, he couldn't cope with the demands of authority and power. He lived a dissolute personal life, surrounding himself with sycophantic advisors. In an attempt to demonstrate his martial prowess, he decided to invade Poland. Before he could do so, in October of 1306, he was assassinated, aged only 16, and so ended the male line of the Pomoysled dynasty. In the power vacuum that followed in 1306, Rudolf of Habsburg, Duke of Austria, seized the throne, but his reign would prove a short one, as he died in July of 1307. The right to the throne then passed to Anne, the eldest daughter of Wenceslas II, who was married to Henry of Gorizia, Duke of Carinthia. Henry was duly elected King of Bohemia in 1307 in his wife's right. His rule, too, would be short. It lasted a mere 3 years. In 1310, Anne's younger sister Elizabeth, then aged only 14, was married into one of the most powerful ruling houses in Europe. Her new spouse was John of Luxembourg, the eldest son of the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VII. The emperor saw the marriage of his son to Elizabeth as an integral part of an expansionist policy. By the end of 1310, John of Luxembourg had invaded Bohemia and had conquered it, deposing his brother-in-law Henry of Gorizia, who retreated back to his duchy of Carinthia. John of Luxembourg would reign as King of Bohemia until 1346, although he largely left the rule of the country to the Czech nobility and spent most of his years in either Luxembourg or at the French court. In later years he lost his eyesight, and he is generally known to history as King John the Blind. John, and Elizabeth's eldest son, was born in 1316, and as he was expected to succeed as King of Bohemia, he was baptised with the Bohemian name Wenceslas. Now, John the Blind had been brought up at the French court, and he wanted the same upbringing for his son. So at the age of 7, little Prince Wenceslas was sent to Paris to be brought up at the court of King Charles IV of France, who had recently married his aunt, Marie of Luxembourg. At his confirmation, Prince Wenceslas decided to take the name Charles in honour of his uncle. In 1328, with the death of Charles IV of France, the French Capetian dynasty came to an end, but the young Bohemian prince remained at the French court when Philip VI, the first Valois king, came to the throne, and indeed in 1329 the young Prince Charles Wenceslas was married to Blanche of Valois, the sister of Philip VI. Wenceslas, now Prince Charles, remained at the French court until at least 1331. The young Bohemian prince was entirely shaped by French manners, by French politics and French art. He had a thoroughly Francophile outlook on life, and that will be important when we come to consider the form and design of the Crown of St Wenceslas. King John the Blind died on the 26th of August 1346, fighting with the French during the Battle of Crécy, and his son Charles inherited the Duchy of Luxembourg and the Kingdom of Bohemia aged 30. His future politically would be rather different from his father's. Only a matter of weeks before his father died, on the 11th of July 1346, Charles had been elected as the King of the Romans, a title that of course gave him succession rights to the imperial throne of the Holy Roman Empire. So from the outset of his reign, Charles would rule a complex pan-European empire. He decided that he would rule that empire from the security of his own kingdom of Bohemia, and from the moment of his accession he made Prague his primary base. The crown of St Wenceslas was made by a Prague goldsmith at Charles's request in late 1346, and was first used at his coronation in St Vitus's Cathedral the following year. So let's have a look at this extraordinary object. The crown of St Wenceslas is made of 22 carat gold, and it weighs approximately 2.4 kilograms, about 5.2 pounds. It is considerably heavier than the English St Edward's crown. It is set with a collection of rather large stones, which are, as was typical for medieval stones, cabochon cut. There are 19 sapphires, 44 balass rubies, spinels, 30 emeralds, 20 pearls and a single ruby. Many of these stones have claw settings, and some of the smaller stones are set on little gold stalks so that the stones are level with the larger stones. The crown is designed in segments so that it can be taken to pieces, presumably for ease of transport, and it is held together at the joints with gold pins. The arches on top of the crown can also be removed. The stone settings on the arches are attached to little plates that are removable too and are bolted to the arches. On the top of the arches is set a cross, and at the centre of this is a sapphire. This is a Byzantine intaglio of the 13th century, and the sapphire is engraved with an image of the crucified Christ between the Virgin Mary and St John. On the cross itself is engraved in bold letters, Hic est spina de corona Domini. Here is a spine from the crown of the Lord. This suggests that a thorn from the crown of thorns is encased within this cross, making the crown a reliquary. Now, the French royal family had in their possession as an heirloom Christ's crown of thorns. It is now in Notre Dame in Paris, having been removed from the Sainte-Chapelle, the French chapel royal. The French crown often made gifts of individual thorns from this crown, and no doubt this thorn in the Crown of St Wenceslas was a gift to Charles from the King of France, his kinsman. Although we know that the crown was made in Prague, it is no surprise, given that Charles was so strongly connected with the French royal house, that the form of the crown, its decoration and design, is strongly in the French manner. With its 4 fleurs-de-lis on the circlet, the crown bears a very striking resemblance to the crown of Charlemagne, the medieval French coronation crown that was lost at the French Revolution. There is, however, a nod too in the design of the crown to Charles's own forthcoming elevation to imperial dignity. The crown is an imperial crown, topped with 4 half arches. Indeed, the imperial form of this crown would influence other later imperial crowns in Europe, including those in England. It was common practice in Europe to associate coronation crowns, like the Crown of St Wenceslas, with a particular saintly figure or a founding father of a nation. The French crown of Charlemagne, although made many centuries after Charlemagne's death, promoted the idea that the medieval French state was a successor state to his Frankish Empire. In England, of course, there was St Edward's crown, which may well have been the saint's burial crown, and gave the impression of a seamless succession between the Plantagenet sovereigns of the later Middle Ages and the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Edward the Confessor. St Stephen's crown in Hungary did much the same. So what is so significant about Wenceslas that Charles chose to name this crown after him? Well, Wenceslas was the 10th century Duke of Bohemia. He was born in 907. He was the son of Duke Vladislaus I. He inherited his father's lands in 921 when he was around 13. He was a pious young man. He reformed and he extended the powers of the church in his lands, constructing the first church of St Vitus in Prague on the site of the present cathedral. He ruled until 935, when there was a court coup, and his brother Boleslav was placed on the ducal throne instead. The legend in the hagiographies that quickly grew up around him was that Boleslav had invited Wenceslas, his brother, to dinner to celebrate the feast of the 2 popular Roman military saints, St Cosmos and St Damian. After the meal, 3 of Boleslav's companions fell upon Wenceslas and stabbed him, with Boleslav finishing his brother off with a lance. Wenceslas was considered to be a martyr, and very quickly a cult grew up around him. And his reputation, his saintly reputation, crossed beyond the boundaries of his own lands throughout Europe. He gained a reputation as an archetypal just ruler, a man of both piety and strength. He became the patron saint of his own land. As a king of a new dynasty, the association of the crown with St Wenceslas gave a sense of legitimacy to Charles IV's rule. When first made, the crown was supposedly used not just for coronations, but as a reliquary crown, and was placed on top of the reliquary head that contained the skull of St Wenceslas in the cathedral, additionally investing the crown with some of the saint's sacred power. So as well as containing the thorn, which made the crown itself a reliquary, through its contact with the skull of St Wenceslas, the crown was in essence a third-class relic too. Now, at the same time that the crown was made for Charles IV in the 14th century, two other items of regalia were also fashioned for him, both of which reflected the German imperial tradition: an orb, known in German as the Reichsapfel, and a sceptre. These objects are curiously not as richly made as the crown. They're made only of silver gilt, and they are now in Vienna. The Luxembourgian dominance of Bohemia wouldn't last all that long, as within a generation the male line of the family died out, and then Bohemia would undergo nearly a century and a half of political turbulence, and the crown was symbolically at the very centre of that. Charles IV was succeeded in 1378 as King of Bohemia by his son Wenceslas IV of Bohemia, who had already been elected King of the Romans in 1376. Wenceslas IV's hold under power was slim, to say the least, and he was in constant conflict with his Bohemian nobles. He was also in conflict with his own family, who had inherited some of the lands that Charles IV had held. Wenceslas IV was never crowned as Holy Roman Emperor, and he was later deposed as King of the Romans. Having no children, he was succeeded in 1419 by his brother Sigismund, who had since 1387 been the King of Hungary in right of his wife. In 1410, Sigismund would be elected King of the Romans, and in 1433 would be crowned the Holy Roman Emperor. As Sigismund had no son, his lands would be inherited by his only daughter Elizabeth. In 1422, Elizabeth would marry Albert, the son of Albert IV, Duke of Austria of the House of Habsburg. From 1437, Albert would rule as King of both Bohemia and Hungary in his wife's right as King Albert II, and would, in 1438, be elected as King of the Romans too. However, in 1439, before he could be crowned as Emperor and aged only 42, he died. In February of 1440, Elizabeth gave birth to a posthumous son called Ladislaus, who within months had been declared king by his mother. The 1440s was a very dangerous time for Christian Europe. The Christian Byzantine Empire had fallen, and the Ottoman Turks were on the rise. They were pushing against the eastern borders of the Holy Roman Empire. An infant king on the throne in Hungary and Bohemia, with a female regent, presented at that moment a risk, and the political situation caused civil war. To add to the complexity within Bohemia, and to some extent in response to the Ottoman threat, the Church would undergo a period of turmoil too, and would see the rise of a religious reformist sect called the Hussites. Now, Ladislaus I would die aged only 17 in 1457, and in 1458 the Estates of Bohemia elected a Hussite noble, George of Podbrady, as king. In 1471, at the death of George of Podbrady, the Estates of Bohemia then elected the 15-year-old Prince Ladislas of Poland as King Ladislas II. His claim to the throne was a strong one. He was the son of Casimir IV of Poland and his wife Elizabeth of Habsburg, the second daughter of Albert II, so is in line of succession from the House of Luxembourg. Ladislaus II would reign until his death in 1516, and then his 10-year-old son Louis would come to the throne as king of both Hungary and Bohemia. Louis reigned for only 10 years, and he died without children in August of 1525, fighting at the Battle of Mohacs in a disastrous campaign against the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Louis had a sister Anne, who in 1521 had been married to the Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, the brother of the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. The marriage agreement, which had been settled in 1515, years before they married, included a clause that should Louis of Hungary and Bohemia die without any issue, that Archduke Ferdinand would become king in his wife's right. In 1526, after his brother-in-law's death, Ferdinand pressed his claim to the throne. Both Hungary and Bohemia were still, in theory, elected monarchies, and although Bohemia elected Ferdinand king in October of 1526, in November of the same year Hungary elected a rival, John Zápolya, as king. By December of 1526, this had been overturned in Ferdinand's favour. Ferdinand I was crowned as King of Bohemia with St Wenceslas crown in February of 1527. Nearly 30 years later, in 1556, he would become Holy Roman Emperor too, when his father abdicated. In 1564, Ferdinand I, who ruled his empire from Prague in much the same way as the House of Luxembourg did 2 centuries before, died and was buried in St Vitus's Cathedral in Prague. He was succeeded by his son, Maximilian II. Now, it was most probably during the reign of Maximilian II, from 1564 to 1576, that 2 of the other key components of the Bohemian regalia were created, a new orb and sceptre. They're much more lavish than the 14th century objects they replaced. Both are very fine examples of Renaissance craftsmanship. The orb, made of 18-karat gold, weighs 780 grams. It is made of 2 hemispheres that are joined together by a jewelled band, which is studded with spinels, sapphires and pearls, all set amid exquisite sprays of foliage, enamelled white and red. The orb is topped with a cross, set once again with spinels, sapphires and pearls. The base of the cross is a pedestal supported on 6 little sphinxes, and around this base is an enamelled inscription, Domini in virtute tuae letabitur rex et super salutari tuum exultabit, a quote from Psalm 21 verse 1. O Lord, in thy strength the king will be glad, and in thy salvation how greatly he will rejoice. The surface of the 2 hemispheres of the orb is decorated with very precisely executed relief engravings. On the upper part, there are scenes illustrating the story of King David, his victory over the giant Goliath and his anointing by Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet. On the lower hemisphere, there is a scene from Genesis of Adam kneeling before God, of Adam being led into the Garden of Eden, and God warning Adam and Eve not to pick the forbidden fruit from the tree. The sceptre is also of 18-karat gold. It is 67 centimetres long and it weighs 1,013 grams. It is decorated with 4 sapphires, 62 pearls and 5 spinels, including a large rectangular spinel as the termination of the sceptre. The head of the sceptre is an elaborate fleuron or stylised flower. The various elements of this flower, which are very finely wrought to look like acanthus, are bolted together, and the stones set in each part act as terminals to these scrolls. The entire surface of the sceptre is covered by engraved decoration with motifs that include vine tendrils, leaves and flowers or acanthus. Some parts, particularly on the stem of the sceptre, are decorated with multicoloured enamel. The Habsburgs would continue to rule Bohemia as part of their Austro-Hungarian landholdings until the First World War, except for a very brief time in the 17th century, when the nobility of Bohemia tried to and nearly succeeded in effecting a coup that very nearly resulted in the crown and regalia being lost to Bohemia. Maximilian II was succeeded as King of Bohemia by his son Rudolf II in 1575. Rudolf was in turn succeeded by his brother Matthias. The Emperor Matthias had no children, and in order to make a robust provision for a succession well in advance of his death, in 1617 he had his cousin and adopted son, the future Emperor Ferdinand II, who who was a grandson of Ferdinand I, elected as the next King of Bohemia. Ferdinand was duly crowned with the Crown of St Wenceslas in St Vitus's Cathedral in June of 1617. The Emperor Matthias died in March of 1619, but in August of that year, only days after Ferdinand II had been elected as Holy Roman Emperor, the nobility of Bohemia, who were primarily Protestant, deposed the Catholic Ferdinand. They then elected, in Ferdinand's stead, the Protestant Elector Palatine of the Rhine, Frederick V, as king. Frederick was duly crowned King of Bohemia on the 4th of November 1619 with St Wenceslas's crown in St Vitus's Cathedral, but in a Protestant ceremony. The following November 1620, Frederick was then deposed by Ferdinand, thus earning himself the sobriquet of the Winter King because of his very short tenure. Frederick fled to Silesia with his wife Elizabeth, the daughter of Charles I of England, and he tried to take the crown of St Wenceslas and the rest of the Bohemian regalia with him into exile. This little blip in the Habsburg succession would turn out to be a rather serious matter indeed, as it would be the catalyst for the 30 Years' War that rocked Europe until the middle of the 17th century. The Emperor Ferdinand II, having reclaimed his throne, had the good sense to ensure that his son, the future Ferdinand III, was well established in his Hungarian Bohemian rule before he succeeded to the imperial throne. Ferdinand III was therefore elected King of Bohemia and crowned with St Wenceslas's crown in 1627, a full decade before his father's death. In 1646, to prevent the crown and the regalia from falling out of Habsburg control again, Ferdinand III ordered that they were taken and deposited in the royal treasury in Vienna, where they would remain for much of the next 300 years, only returning to Prague under an armed escort for the coronation. The last coronation of a Bohemian king was that of the Austrian Emperor Ferdinand I, who reigned in Bohemia as King Ferdinand V. He was crowned in September of 1836. He reigned until 1875, and during his time there was a push for more independence and autonomy for the lands of the Bohemian crown within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In April of 1867, the crown of St Wenceslas was returned permanently to St Vitus's Cathedral, and for the first time placed in the strong room beside the shrine of St Wenceslas. Although it was never worn again, the return of the crown and regalia to Bohemia was an acknowledgement of that growing autonomy. Today the crown is very much a symbol of Czech independence and self-determination. To end, there is a curious tradition that circulates in the Czech Republic about the supposed power of the crown of St Wenceslas. It is said that if a person who is not entitled to wear the crown puts it on their head, they will die within a year. A rumour arose in November of 1941, when the country was occupied by Nazi Germany, that the German Reich protector Reinhard Heydrich had put the crown on his head. Heydrich was then assassinated in June of 1942. This tradition is likely to be of recent invention, but it demonstrates how the glorious crown of St Wenceslas, which is both a relic and a reliquary, remains a potent symbol of Czech identity, even in the 21st century. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this channel, you're bound to enjoy my magazine, The Antiquary. Published every month, it is a labour of love for me, and in it I explore some of the more obscure aspects of our shared history, all beautifully illustrated in full colour. It ships across the world, is offered in print and digital format, and readers give it 5 stars on Google. If you love your history like me, particularly the history of objects, buildings, people and places, why not consider subscribing? Subscribing helps support my work and the channel too. There's a link above and in the video description that takes you to the magazine website.